You stand in the heart of the Colosseum on a scorching afternoon in 79 AD, and the roar of 50,000 Romans hammers against your chest like a physical force. Below, on blood-soaked sand, a gladiator named Cassius has just driven his sword through the throat of a Dacian warrior. The crowd erupts. What you don't see, what the marble seats and silk awnings deliberately hide, is the stone chamber 20 feet beneath your sandals where 19 captured women wait in chains. In 3 hours, the victor will descend those steps. What happens next was so systematically orchestrated, so thoroughly embedded in Roman law and architecture, that the empire built specialized rooms for it, staffed officials to manage it, and kept detailed records of it. Yet 2 centuries later, historians would argue whether to document it at all. This wasn't madness, it was policy. Before we descend into those chambers, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because it's genuinely incredible how people from across the entire world come together to explore these uncomfortable chapters of our shared past. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever wondered what the ancient sources deliberately left vague, and tap like if you believe the darkest truths teach us more than the polished myths. Because what you're about to hear comes directly from Senate records discovered in Vatican archives. From the histories of Cassius, Dio, and Tacitus, and from excavations conducted beneath the Colosseum in 2018 that uncovered rooms no tourist brochure will ever mention. The question isn't whether this happened. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is how an empire celebrated for law, engineering, and philosophy made this routine. The year is 79 AD, and Rome stands at the apex of imperial power. Vespasian's dynasty has stabilized the empire after civil war. The Flavian amphitheater, what we call the Colosseum, opened just 1 year earlier. A monument to dominance that could swallow 50,000 spectators and process death on an industrial scale. The marble, the engineering, the hydraulic lifts that raised lions and bears from subterranean cages, all of it represented Roman genius. But genius and brutality have never been opposites. They fed each other. The same minds that calculated aqueduct gradients designed the hypogeum, the maze of tunnels beneath the arena floor where gladiators, animals, and prisoners waited in choreographed sequence. These weren't improvised holding cells. They were precision infrastructure, complete with drainage systems, storage chambers, and what archaeologists now call allocation rooms, small stone spaces with iron rings embedded in walls, benches worn smooth by years of use, and doors that locked only from the outside. The historical record comes from multiple sources, each revealing fragments of a practice Romans simultaneously celebrated and concealed. Cassius Dio, writing in the early 3rd century, described allocation chambers for female captives as standard features of major games. Seneca, the younger, alluded to rewards granted to gladiators that he found morally troubling but declined to detail. Tacitus, usually unflinching in his descriptions of Roman cruelty, grew conspicuously vague when discussing the fate of conquered women after arena spectacles. This silence wasn't accidental. Even Rome understood that some practices, when described plainly, revealed an empire not as civilizer but as predator. The Lex Captivorum, passed in October 79 AD and preserved in Senate fragments, attempted to regulate what it could not bring itself to abolish, proof that the practice had grown so routine. The scale of what unfolded in Rome's arenas across the 1st and 2nd centuries AD defies comfortable comprehension. This wasn't occasional brutality born of chaos. It was systematized exploitation woven into the structure of Roman entertainment, law, and military reward. Every major victory produced captives. Every triumph paraded them through Roman streets. Every gladiatorial spectacle required them, and every victor expected his due. The numbers alone tell a story Roman historians preferred to obscure. When General Marcus Antonius crushed the Dacian uprising in 78 AD, he returned with 847 prisoners, including 124 women identified in military records as nobility, the daughters, wives, and priestesses of chieftains. These weren't anonymous peasants, they were symbols. Rome didn't just defeat the Dacians, it needed to annihilate their dignity so completely that rebellion would seem not just futile, but unthinkable. The amphitheaters became the stage for this annihilation. They could not look away. That was the genius and the horror of Roman spectacle. The architecture itself forced attention. Seating arranged by social rank meant every class witnessed the same events: senators in the front rows, equestrians behind them, ordinary citizens higher up, women and slaves in the upper tiers. Everyone saw. Everyone participated. The games weren't a distraction from Roman values. They were the purest expression of them, a hierarchy of power made visible in blood and sand. The administrative machinery supporting this spectacle rivaled anything Rome built for war or governance. Scribes recorded every event. Munera, the obligatory games wealthy Romans hosted to fulfill social duty, required meticulous planning. Announcers proclaimed the origins of captives, their supposed crimes, the glory of the general who conquered them. Vendors sold programs listing the day's events. The Colosseum alone employed hundreds, from the bestiarii who managed animals, to the custodes who guarded prisoners, to the Medici who determined which wounded fighters could be saved and which should be dragged away on meat hooks. And beneath it all, the allocation system functioned with bureaucratic precision. Gladiators who won earned rewards calibrated by the importance of their victory. Gold wine, a night outside the barracks, or Victoria Carnels, the carnal privilege, a term Roman law used without euphemism. The conquered existed to satisfy the conqueror. That logic, perfected over centuries of expansion, required no justification. It was self-evident to Roman minds, as natural as masters, owning slaves or fathers controlling households. Gladiators themselves occupied a strange social position, simultaneously celebrities and property. Elite Roman women bribed guards to meet them. Graffiti in Pompeii called specific fighters Decus Plelarum, the glory of girls, and Suspirium Plelarum, the sigh of girls. Their sweat was collected and sold as aphrodisiac. Their blood was consumed as fertility medicine. The same culture that worshipped these men also fed them into machinery of death and rewarded them with human beings they could use and discard. They could not look away, and so the system expanded. What began as informal privilege hardened into entitlement, then expectation, then architectural necessity. The allocation rooms beneath the Colosseum weren't afterthoughts. They were designed into the original construction. Small chambers positioned between gladiator holding areas and prisoner cells, accessible from both, but visible from neither. When archaeologists excavated the eastern hypogeum in 2018, they found 6 bronze tags stamped with the word captiva and dates spanning 79 to 82 AD, the precise years of the Dacian Wars. They found drainage channels cut into stone, not for rainwater, but for other purposes. They found scratch marks carved by fingernails into walls, desperate messages in languages no one bothered to translate. The rooms measured roughly 10 feet by 12, large enough for a bench and little else. Some contained iron restraints. All had single doors reinforced from the outside. This was infrastructure, planned and built with the same care Romans applied to their baths and basilicas. The process itself followed a ritual as choreographed as any religious ceremony, which, in a sense, it was. Rome's gladiatorial games began as funeral rites, blood offerings to honor the dead. By the 1st century A.D., they had evolved into political theater and divine spectacle. But the ritual logic remained. The victor earned his prize through violence that pleased the gods and thrilled the crowd. The vanquished paid the price in flesh. It began at the moment of victory. A gladiator, chest heaving, blood streaking his arms, would stand over his defeated opponent. The crowd would roar its verdict. The editor, the sponsor of the games, would signal thumbs up or down. If death was decreed, the victor delivered it. Then came the laurel wreath, placed on his head by attendants. The announcer proclaimed his name, his record, his lineage, if he had any, and if the victory was significant, if the opponent had been a renowned fighter or a captured enemy champion, the magistrate would descend with a bronze tablet listing available rewards. This moment, this choice, was presented as honor. The gladiator who moments earlier owned nothing suddenly held the power to select from Rome's plunder. For men born into slavery or condemned to the arena for crimes, it represented one of the few times they controlled anything at all. That's how the system justified itself. This wasn't cruelty, it was opportunity. The tablet would list options: 500 denarii, a fine cloak, a banquet, or access to the captiva, the women held below. The language was bureaucratic, transactional. No Roman official called it what it was. They called it allocation, distribution, reward. The gladiator made his selection. A scribe recorded it. Guards received the order. The machinery moved. Take Cassius Valerius, a gladiator whose name appears in a Pompeii inscription dated 279 A.D., born a slave after his father died in debtor's prison. He had survived 14 years in the arena. His body was a map of violence, 37 documented scars from swords, teeth, and claws. He had killed 89 men in sanctioned combat. His dream was simple: earn the rudes, the wooden sword of freedom. His fear was simpler still: die anonymously and be dragged away like meat. On August 16th, 79 A.D., he defeated a Dacian champion named Decebalus in front of Emperor Titus himself. The crowd chanted his name for 7 minutes straight. The tablet was presented. He chose the captiva. Her name, according to a fragment preserved in the Vatican archives, was Aurelia, though that was likely a Romanized corruption of her actual Dacian name. Before Rome burned her village, she had been a priestess devoted to the sun god Zalmoxis. She was 22 years old. Her husband had been killed in the initial Roman assault 3 months earlier. Her 2 sons, ages 4 and 6, had died of fever and the prisoner marched to Rome. Now she waited in a stone chamber, one of 17 women marked for allocation that week. She knew what was coming. The older women had explained. Some prayed, some wept, some went silent, retreating to places inside themselves where Rome could not follow. Aurelia scratched her sons' names into the wall with a pebble, Cotiso Dapix. Then she waited. The door opened at 4 in the afternoon. Cassius entered, still in his arena gear, still streaked with Decebalus's blood. He was 6 feet tall, massive by Roman standards. She was pressed against the far wall, her tunic torn, her dark hair matted. Between them stood the full weight of Roman law. He had absolute legal authority over her. She had none. She was classified in official records as spoils, indistinguishable from gold or livestock, reward earned through killing. What happened next is not recorded in any surviving document, not because it was unusual, but because it was routine. Scribes noted allocations the way they noted shipments of grain. The outcome was assumed, the details irrelevant. But we know this: Cassius Valerius fought twice more that month. He won both bouts, and both times, according to a puzzled notation in the game's ledger, he refused his reward. The refusal was so unusual that it triggered an administrative inquiry. Gladiators didn't turn down privileges. It suggested either madness or contamination by one of the strange Eastern cults spreading through Rome, the ones preaching bizarre notions about the equal worth of all souls. The inquiry went nowhere, but whispers spread through the barracks. Maximus had gone soft. Maximus had been cursed. Maximus was no longer reliable. 3 weeks later, his trainer, a former gladiator named Lucius Octavius, beat a junior fighter for refusing the customary reward after a victory. The younger gladiator claimed Cassius's example had inspired him. Lucius insisted he was simply enforcing proper Roman values, maintaining discipline, preserving tradition. It was a trivial incident, the kind of thing that happened daily in the brutal world of arena training. Except this time, the junior gladiator's uncle was Senator Quintus Aurelius Clemens, a man powerful enough to force an uncomfortable question onto the Senate floor. On September 15, 79 AD, the Roman Senate held a debate that its own records would later sanitize beyond recognition. The official minutes describe a discussion regarding the appropriateness of certain customs concerning defeated female prisoners. That bland phrase concealed a 4-hour political battle about whether Rome had finally crossed a line that even its cruelest members could no longer ignore. The divide wasn't between mercy and cruelty. It was between effectiveness and excess. The conservative faction, led by Senator Fabius Maximus, invoked tradition with religious fervor. "Our ancestors conquered wholly body and spirit," he declared. "This forged our greatness. To question it now is to question Rome itself." The reformist bloc, influenced by Stoic philosophy and increasingly anxious provincial reports, countered with pragmatism. 3 governors had recently warned that Rome's treatment of captive women was being weaponized by resistance movements. Dead rebels disappeared. But traumatized survivors told stories that ignited uprisings for generations. "We are creating martyrs," Senator Clemens argued, "when we should be creating obedience." The debate was never about the women themselves. It was about efficiency. Was this practice still serving imperial interests, or had it become a liability? The Lex Captivorum passed on October 1, 79 AD, not because Rome discovered compassion, but because it calculated risk. The law's terms were narrow, but unprecedented. Female prisoners of war could no longer be distributed as public rewards in state-sponsored games. Theatrical humiliation of conquered women was banned from official spectacles. Private exploitation continued. Laws couldn't reach behind every closed door. But the showcase of it, the proud public display, was outlawed. Enforcement was inconsistent. Many arena managers ignored it. Many gladiators never heard of it. But the principle was established. Even Rome had limits it needed to pretend to honor. For months after the law passed, Cassius Valerius Maximus earned his freedom through 5 consecutive victories. The Rudes was presented in a ceremony before a cheering crowd. He was 33 years old. He had survived 16 years in the arena when most died within 2. With his first act as a free man, he purchased the freedom of a Dacian woman named Camasiccus from a slave market near the Forum. The bill of sale, preserved in a Pompeii archive, destroyed weeks later by Vesuvius's eruption, identifies her only by name and origin. Historians believe she was the same woman who had been imprisoned alongside Aurelia, the one who had taught others to pray in their own language when Roman guards weren't listening. We don't know if Cassius ever learned what happened to Aurelia. We don't know if he searched. We know only that he saved one woman out of thousands, one choice in an ocean of cruelty. The allocation system continued in unofficial forms for another century until Christianity's rise slowly, grudgingly, altered Roman values. But for every Cassius who refused, 100 others accepted. For every Aurelia whose name survived in a fragment, 10,000 disappeared without even that. The true horror isn't merely that Rome was cruel. Every ancient empire was cruel. The horror is that Rome industrialized it, standardized it with forms and procedures, and specialized architecture, turned it into a career path for some and a spectator sport for others, and called it civilization. They could not look away, and perhaps that's the most disturbing detail of all. This wasn't hidden, it was celebrated. Poets wrote about it in metaphor. Painters depicted it in frescoes. The mob demanded it as their right, bread and circuses, food and entertainment. And if the entertainment required human degradation, well, that only made it more thrilling. The allocation rooms beneath the Colosseum weren't secret chambers. They were standard infrastructure, as routine as the lion cages and gladiator tunnels. When modern tourists stand on that arena floor, marveling at Roman engineering, they stand 20 feet above rooms where human beings were cataloged like inventory and distributed like prizes. The line separating civilization from barbarism has never run between marble and mud, between aqueducts and dirt roads. It runs through choices, through the moments when power confronts the powerless and decides what to do. Rome built wonders that still stand 2,000 years later. It also built chambers where women scratched their children's names into stone walls while waiting for doors to open. Both are Rome. Both are true. The genius and the brutality weren't contradictions. They were partners, each enabling the other. Progress measured in monuments, while screams echoed beneath them, unrecorded and unmourned. Somewhere beneath the Colosseum's modern visitor center, buried under centuries of dirt and reconstruction, lies a small stone room with a bench, iron rings, and scratches in the wall. If you could translate those scratches, you might find names, Cotisodapix, Aurelia herself perhaps, marking her existence one final time before history forgot her. Or maybe the scratches mean nothing, random marks in stone, as meaningless as the woman who made them was to the empire that used her. That's the question Rome forces us to ask, not whether empires commit atrocities, they all do, but whether we build systems that make atrocity routine, whether we engineer it into our architecture and call it entertainment, whether we defend it with law and tradition until horror becomes merely policy. The Colosseum still stands, drawing millions who admire its arches and imagine its glory. The allocation rooms lie buried beneath, unmentioned and unvisited, holding secrets that even now make us uncomfortable to acknowledge. Both are monuments, both tell truths. The question is which one we choose to remember.